Emergency fund and debt payoff strategies. Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about two very important topics that often confuse people, especially those who are trying to improve their financial situation: building an emergency fund and paying off debt. These two goals are extremely important, but many people struggle with knowing which one to focus on first and how to actually make progress on both. If you've ever felt stuck between wanting to save money for unexpected expenses while also trying to get rid of debt, then this video is for you. We're going to break down both topics in detail, explain the reasons behind the strategies, and give you practical steps you can start taking right away. By the end of this video, you'll have a clear understanding of how to build an emergency fund, how to approach debt payoff in a smart way, and how to balance both goals without feeling overwhelmed. So if you're ready, let's get started. First, let's talk about what an emergency fund actually is and why it's so important. An emergency fund is money that you set aside specifically for unexpected expenses or financial emergencies. This could be things like losing your job, having a medical emergency, needing urgent car repairs, or facing any other situation that requires money quickly and unexpectedly. The reason an emergency fund is so important is because life is unpredictable. No matter how carefully you plan, things can go wrong, and when they do, not having money set aside can force you to rely on credit cards or loans, which often makes your financial situation worse instead of better. Having an emergency fund gives you a financial cushion so that when life throws you a curveball, you don't have to go into debt to deal with it. Many people underestimate how important this is. They think they can just deal with emergencies when they happen by using credit cards or borrowing money from family. But what often happens is that using credit cards for emergencies creates new debt. And that debt can quickly grow because of high interest rates. Before long, what started as a temporary problem becomes a long-term financial burden. So how much money should you actually have in your emergency fund? This is a question I get asked a lot. The general recommendation is to have at least 3 to 6 months of essential living expenses saved. This means enough money to cover your basic needs like rent, food, utilities, transportation, and minimum debt payments for 3 to 6 months if you were to lose your income. However, I want to be realistic with you. If you're currently living on a low or moderate income and don't have any savings at all, saving 3 to 6 months of expenses can feel impossible. In that case, I recommend starting with a smaller goal first. Try to save $500 or $1 as your initial emergency fund. This amount can already cover many smaller emergencies and give you some breathing room. Once you reach that goal, you can then work toward building a larger emergency fund over time. Now let's talk about how to actually build an emergency fund. Especially if your income is limited, the first step is to treat your emergency fund like a non-negotiable bill. This means you should set aside money for your emergency fund before you spend on other things. Even if you can only save $20 or $50 per week, that's still better than saving nothing. The key is consistency. One effective way to build your emergency fund is to automate the process. Set up an automatic transfer from your checking account to a separate savings account on the same day you get paid. This way, you won't even have to think about it, and you'll be less tempted to spend the money on other things. Another important point is to keep your emergency fund in a separate account from your regular spending money. Ideally, this should be a savings account that is not linked to your debit card, so it's not too easy to access. The goal is to make it slightly inconvenient to spend this money so that you only use it for real emergencies. Now let's talk about what counts as a real emergency and what doesn't. This is very important because many people end up using their emergency fund for things that are not actually emergencies, which defeats the purpose of having one. A real emergency is something that is unexpected, necessary, and urgent. Examples include losing your job, Having a medical emergency that requires immediate treatment. Needing to repair your car so you can get to work. Or dealing with a major home repair that can't wait. These are situations where you need money quickly and don't have another way to cover the cost without going into debt. On the other hand, things like buying a new phone because yours is old, going on vacation, or replacing your furniture are not emergencies. These are planned or optional expenses that should be budgeted for separately. If you use your emergency fund for these kinds of things, you'll constantly have to rebuild it, and it will never grow. Now let's shift our focus to debt payoff strategies. If you have debt, especially high-interest debt like credit cards, it's important to have a clear plan for paying it off. There are two main methods that people use to pay off debt: the debt avalanche method and the debt snowball method. The debt avalanche method focuses on paying off the debt with the highest interest rate first while making minimum payments on all other debts. This method saves you the most money in interest over time because you're eliminating the most expensive debt first. For example, if you have a credit card with 22% interest and a personal loan with 8% interest, you would focus on paying off the credit card first. The debt snowball method, on the other hand, focuses on paying off the smallest debt first while making minimum payments on larger debts. This method is more about psychology and motivation. By paying off small debts quickly, you get quick wins that can help you stay motivated to continue paying off the rest of your debt. Both methods have their advantages. The avalanche method is mathematically better because it saves more money in interest. However, the snowball method can be more effective for people who need motivation and quick wins to stay consistent. The best method for you depends on your personality and what will help you stay committed to the process. Now, one of the biggest questions people have is, should I focus on building my emergency fund first or paying off debt first? The answer depends on your specific situation. But here's a general guideline that works well for most people. If you have high-interest debt, such as credit card debt with interest rates above 15%, it usually makes sense to focus on paying off that debt first while still trying to build a small emergency fund of around $1. High-interest debt grows very quickly, and the interest you're paying can end up costing you more than what you would earn by saving that money. However, if you have no emergency fund at all and something unexpected happens, you might end up having to use credit cards again, which would put you back into debt. That's why having at least a small emergency fund of $500 to $1 is important even while you're paying off debt. Once you have that small emergency fund in place, you can then focus more aggressively on paying off high-interest debt. After your high-interest debt is paid off, you can then go back to building a larger emergency fund of 3 to 6 months of expenses. Let me give you a real-life example to make this clearer. Let's say Sarah has $3 in credit card debt with 20% interest. And she has no emergency fund. She's trying to decide whether to save money or pay off debt first. In this situation, I would recommend that Sarah first saves $1 as a starter emergency fund. This might take her 2 or 3 months depending on how much she can save each month. Once she has that $1, she can then focus on paying off her credit card debt as aggressively as possible. After the debt is paid off, she can continue building her emergency fund until she reaches 3 to 6 months of expenses. Another example is Michael, who has $15 in student loans with 6% interest and no credit card debt. In his case, because the interest rate is relatively low, he could focus more on building his emergency fund first while making his regular student loan payments. Once he has 3 months of expenses saved, he can then decide whether to pay extra toward his student loans or continue building his emergency fund. These examples show that there's no one-size-fits-all answer. You need to look at your own debts, interest rates, and financial goals to decide what makes the most sense for you. Now let's talk about some common mistakes people make when trying to build an emergency fund and pay off debt at the same time. The first mistake is trying to do too much at once. Some people try to save aggressively while also paying off debt aggressively. But this can leave them with very little money for living expenses, which often leads to burnout or going back into debt. It's usually better to focus on one main goal at a time while still making progress on the other. The second mistake is not having a clear plan. Many people say they want to pay off debt or build savings, but they don't have a specific number or timeline in mind. Having a clear goal, such as, I want to save $3 in the next 12 months, or, I want to pay off my credit card by December, can help you stay focused and motivated. The third mistake is using credit cards for emergencies while trying to pay them off. This creates a cycle that's very hard to break. If you're working on paying off credit card debt, it's important to stop using those cards for new purchases, especially for non-emergency expenses. The fourth mistake is not tracking progress. When you're working on big financial goals like building an emergency fund or paying off debt, it can sometimes feel like you're not making any progress, especially in the beginning. That's why it's important to track your progress regularly, whether that's checking your savings balance or watching your debt decrease each month. Before we wrap up, let me give you a quick summary of what we covered in this video. We talked about what an emergency fund is and why it's so important to have one. We discussed how much you should aim to have in your emergency fund and how to build it even if your income is limited. We also covered the difference between real emergencies and non-emergencies. Then we moved on to debt payoff strategies, including the avalanche and snowball methods, and how to decide whether to focus on saving or paying off debt first. Finally, we looked at common mistakes to avoid. Building an emergency fund and paying off debt are two of the most important steps you can take toward financial stability. While it can feel overwhelming at times, especially when your income is limited, having a clear plan and taking consistent action will help you make progress over time. If this video was helpful for you, I would really appreciate it if you could give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel. I'm creating this personal money management series to help you improve your finances step by step. And there are many more videos coming that will cover other important topics. Also, let me know in the comments what your current situation is. Are you currently focused on building an emergency fund, paying off debt, or trying to do both at the same time? What challenges are you facing? I read every comment and your feedback helps me create content that's actually useful for you. Thank you so much for watching until the end. I hope this video gave you clarity on how to approach both building an emergency fund and paying off debt in a smart and realistic way. I'll see you in the next video. Take care and have a great day.